My name is Bill Ochin. I am the chairman of the Burlington Republicans. I think a lot of people think, like I do, that it's time to try something other than throwing spitballs at each other from across the room and sit down at one table at the same time and have a discussion. I think we need to see more of this. I would like this to be a model. I think we can do this. You already know about how to submit questions to the panel. I am going to make one request. Well, first, I have to thank the Burlington School District. They've done an incredible job. They've gone very much out of the way to facilitate this. And Melanie, the principal, Melanie Alexander, has been awesome. So if you do know her or see her, yeah, tell her, no, she deserves that. Tell her thank you. On a Friday afternoon, evening, to come out to a panel discussion on elections, it's a big ask. But you're here. Our panelists will be introduced by the moderator, Dan Feliciano. I have one request. Do you see this? Because these people have made a sacrifice, and so have you, to come here, off. Because if it's on, even if it's silent, the studies show, I used to be a teacher, that you still keep thinking about it. And these people deserve every bit of our attention. All right, Dan.
All right, I think, welcome. So we're gonna have a conversation around the election integrities. I think I was selected to, Bill asked me to do this because he came to a Braver Angels meeting. Has anyone heard of the Braver Angels? Chittenden County Braver Angels. I'm the Republican co-chair of that committee. So it's a great forum to have discussions, right? And that's one of the things Bill had come to a meeting. And one of the things is, how do we have a frank, honest discussion without attacking one another and in a positive manner? And I'm going to give you an example. One of our meetings just recently, we had a woman come in from Burlington, and she attended the meeting. And when she left, she stood up, and she was totally progressive. And I'm the red co-chair. She was literally in tears, got up and gave me a hug, and said, "I feel so heard. I've been appreciated." And this is the kind of dialogue and conversation I'm looking for. I'm not looking for personal attacks. I'm looking for firsthand experiences, and we'll try to do that tonight. We're at the Braver Angels, one of the things we do is we try to have firsthand experience, and we never would ask you a gotcha question. Does everyone know what a gotcha question is? Like, do you still beat your wife? That kind of stuff is a gotcha question, right? As horrible as it is, right? I know them well. But we never ask gotcha questions. And I'm going to give you an example of a gotcha question. We might go beyond that tonight. Is what data did you use? Show us the data. We think that's, right now, data has become so personal, I would say, right? People are seeing things so differently. That's an example of a gotcha question. Or another example would be, I heard from, and that is like a third-party source. So we try to talk from our firsthand experiences and with honest and candor. So just imagine that. You come to a meeting and more than once, you leave totally fulfilled, right? And emotional. People get emotional. My best friend in the Braver Angels he's an American. He lives in Burlington, but he lives in Montreal. He drives down for the meeting, and he's very progressive. And we get so excited to talk about politics with one another. And it's a great conversation. We're on two different sides of the spectrum, but we're so excited to have this conversation, and it's so respectful. I always leave learning something new. He leaves learning something new. We call each other, and it's just a positive experience. It doesn't have to be like it is today. So keep that in mind as we go forward. That's going to be one of the things, and I think that's why Bill had attended one of the meetings and asked me to moderate that, because I'm not a fan of that. And I'm on WVMT, the morning show. We just had recently some knucklehead caller call in and was going to attack Emma Mulvaney-Stanek. No, we're not going to tolerate that. Bam, you're gone. We can't have those conversations. They need to be more honest, more grounded, and everyone's gonna have a different belief. Sometimes I'll turn 180 on this subject, right? And like tonight, we're gonna talk about elections and mailing out ballots, and I always vote in person, but you know what? If it was on blockchain, you get me blockchain, I'll use blockchain, right? So that's a totally different perspective, if you will. So just hold your clapping, no booing, no cheering. This is just gonna be a nice forum. You have cards to write questions down. We'll aggregate those questions, put them into groupings, and we'll put it to the panel. Does that sound fair? You guys agree to that? We'll hold off on all that cheering or jeering. That's just horrible. That's horrible, right? We want to set a better example. We're going to start by introducing our candidates, right? So we have Secretary of State. I only said yes to this because I thought she would say no. Little did I know, she goes to every event she's invited to. So we have Secretary Sarah Copeland Hanzas. Want to give us a little bit about your background?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Dan, and thank you to Bill for doing a lot of work to set this up, and thank you to the Hunt Middle School folks for hosting us here tonight. And thank you all for coming out for what I hope is a good conversation. The Secretary of State in Vermont does 4 main duties. We oversee elections, which means we train all of the town and city clerks. We oversee the Vermont State Archives and Records, which means that we are the keepers of all the documents that you get to have access to so that you can know what your government is doing on your behalf. We license over 80,000 professionals in the state of Vermont, and through professional licensing, we make sure folks have the qualifications to do what they're doing, and if there's a complaint against someone, we investigate and even prosecute those complaints. And we register every single business in the state of Vermont. So if you own a business, an LLC, your registration annual renewal is due before the end of March.
All right, well, Rob, you want to introduce yourself? Rob Roper?
Thanks for that last reminder.
I'm trying to think which of my 5 businesses.
No problem.
My name is Rob Roper. I've been involved in Vermont politics and policy for 25 years, which is kind of a scary number, looking back on it. I served as the chairman of the Vermont Republican Party for about 3 years, from 2007 to the end of 2009. I was the president of the Ethan Allen Institute for 9 years, which is Vermont's free market think tank. And currently, I write a Substack column called Behind the Lines, Rob Roper on Vermont Politics.
Thanks, Rob. Ron, want to introduce yourself there?
Sure.
Ron Lawrence. Yep.
Ron Lawrence. I'm a software engineer by profession. I'm also involved in the Republican Party. I'm the Essex Town Chair and the Vice Chair for the Chittenden County GOP. Got involved in this because I help candidates with data, voter data. So that's why I'm here.
Mr. John Odum.
Hi, thanks everybody for being here. Thanks everybody up here. My name's John Odum. I'm the 14-year city clerk in Montpelier. I am in that capacity a certified municipal clerk through the International Association. I'm also a certified ethical hacker, which sounds more impressive than it is, quite honestly, and it's all very academic for me. I never get to practice, but before I was clerk, I did work in the nonprofit and electoral sector doing organizing and some IT work. I'm here because I was asked, but because I said yes, because I love the topic. I think election integrity is really about 2 things. I think it's about security, and I think it's about transparency. I think you put those 2 things together, and that equals integrity. And obviously, as a certified ethical hacker, I'm a security geek, but so I love to talk about it. But really, the entire topic is it's so important, and it's so energizing, I think. So I'm really glad you all are here to participate.
Well, thank you, John. So I've always had, so just a little bit, I do know a little bit about the elections process back in Jim Condo's day. I had conversations with Jim about mapping out the process. What does it look like and doing things? I've ran a lot of data studies. I did some data studies back in, what election was it? We were looking at 2016 election, I think it was. We were looking at some results, analyzing the results, but from a statistical method, right? So I use these statistical tools to analyze election data. So I'm really interested in the process And one of the things I think we're going to learn tonight, which I learned because the secretary's been on the show so many times now, is there's a lot of stuff we care about, but it's in statute. So if you want to change it, you're going to have to get elected. So we're just going to jump right into some of these issues. We're going to start with definitions. One of the things, it's not always clear to us what things mean, right? So sometimes you might see a 6. If you're looking at it from a different perspective, it might look like a 9. So the question's going to be open to everyone. When you say election integrity, what specific outcomes are you trying to guarantee? Voter rolls, accurate counts, secure chain of custody, public trust. What does election integrity look like, and how would you define it? We'll just go right down the line.
Well, I would say that election integrity is we want to be able to ensure that we have one person, one vote, and we want to make sure that we maintain the secret ballot. So we need to put systems in place where those things can be guaranteed. So election integrity to me is the count that we get at the end of the day actually reflective of the way people vote, one person, one vote, through the secret ballot.
Great. Secretary?
Well, he took my answer, so.
Well, there you go. So,
So-
would you see anything differently
Yes.
or nuance?
Yep. I think there's an important thing to add to that, and that is that in my definition, in order for us to have faith that the outcome of the election reflects the will of the people, we need as many people as we can possibly get to vote. I think we should be aiming for 100% participation so that when somebody gets 45% of the vote and someone else gets 46% of the vote, but there's still 35 or so percent that have not voted, or I guess in that case 25%, but we need to know that we are getting as many people participating as possible. And I know you all can't see this graph. Maybe the cameras can zoom in on it a little bit. This is a graph of voter turnout. And it shows that in the elections since 2012, we have gotten between 39% turnout and 72.9% turnout. So that means that in our lowest turnout election, 61% of Vermonters did not vote. How can you say you know the will of the people when a majority of them did not vote? So I think election integrity, in addition to all the things that Rob said, needs to include robust participation among eligible voters.
Ron? What would you like to add to that?
Well, first of all, I agree with the things that have been said so far. We really want to make sure that the result of the vote is a true reflection of our citizens and their desires. What I would add to the issue of getting more people out to vote, I fear that if there's not much confidence in the vote, that's where you wind up losing an awful lot of folks. They simply don't go out to vote because they don't feel like it makes any difference. So that's one of the things that I would add to that picture.
How about you, John? John Odum?
Well, everybody's kind of covered it here, haven't they? I would say, all the elements that folks just mentioned are part of integrity. I mentioned that I think the components of integrity already are transparency and security, but I think really the ultimate judge of voting integrity is that we, as a people, can be confident that it's being done right, that it's confident that it's been done well. It breaks my heart as an election administrator, and I know others feel that way, that so many folks these days have such, I think it's healthy to have concerns over the democratic process, but at the end of the day, we should all be proud of it. It's really, this is a fundamental piece of what makes us American. This is something that folks have died for, and we should be proud of our electoral process, and I think that's the ultimate reflection of integrity, is if we can see that pride among each other.
Thanks. So, you know what, I guess I got all excited talking about this. I forgot the opening statement. So, John, you continue talking. You have 2 to 3 minutes. Just want to make an opening statement there, my friend?
I think I probably just did.
There you go. That's your opening statement. How about you, Ron?
I actually misunderstood. I thought we were
Yeah.
just introducing ourselves. I do have an opening statement.
Go ahead, Juan, give us an
Let
opening.
me get through it. My background is information systems and web application development. I've tried to use that experience to support candidates, and I've been looking at the voter data in that role as in that role. I do have concerns about our election systems, but rather than argue the politics, I've worked with others to look at our systems, and particularly through the lens of the data. Specifically, we've focused on the voter data as published by the Secretary of State's office, and we've looked at it over multiple election cycles. I want to be clear, though, we did not find information to prove fraud, okay? And we have absolutely no reason to question the integrity of any of our elections officers or officials. What we did find are a number of anomalies, patterns in the data that raise questions about how our system behaves. And that matters because the checklist is used to validate the ballots that are returned. And once a ballot is accepted, we can no longer distinguish good ballots from bad. So the integrity of the system depends heavily on that voter checklist. I'm hoping tonight will be a step toward restoring confidence in our election system, but confidence comes from verification, not presumption. And when we see patterns we can't independently verify or explain, the responsible next step is not dismissal, it's investigation. Thanks.
Secretary?
Thank you very much, and I want to thank Ron for opening up the line of communication with our office about the report. Our team did a full analysis of the report and each of the different categories of oddities and anomalies, and I think the basic answer was that none of these categories show an indication that there was anything illegal happening. And so that's why the team has invited further conversation if we want to continue to break that down a little bit, and maybe some of the conversation that we have tonight will be around the laws that are followed when our office and our town and city clerks in Vermont maintain their voter registration lists. But in terms of an opening statement, I really want to just come back to that fact that we have in any given election between 27% and 61% of Vermonters who are not voting. And when you compare that to our high water mark year of voter participation, which was 2020, when we had 372,885 ballots cast by Vermonters. That was nearly 73% of Vermonters voting. There was only one instance of an irregularity that rose to the level of fraud that was investigated by the Attorney General's office. So that is a 0.0003% incidence of voter fraud. And so that 0.0003, while we don't want that ever to happen, the instance that we saw was intercepted by attentive clerks, as we often see. After any election, clerks are coming to us with their observations of oddities or anomalies that they saw, and they're following up. We're following up. We are referring to the Attorney General or to the FBI, anything that has the appearance that election fraud might have happened. But as I've said before, I think the big challenge in a democracy is not the 0.0003% of a chance that someone might fraudulently cast a ballot. It's the 30 to 60% of Vermonters who aren't voting.
All right, well, I guess my turn.
Go on.
Yeah, we all agree that election law should make it easy to vote but hard to cheat. And we all agree that the key principles of our election laws must be able to guarantee our one person, one vote, and the secret ballot. So the questions are, where do we draw the lines and make the laws to maintain that balance? So over the past couple of decades, Vermont election laws have changed in several ways to make it more convenient to cast a ballot. 45 days of early voting, automatic opt-in registration at the DMV, self-administration of the voter's oath, and of course, the big one, moving to an absentee ballots for all, regardless of request system in 2020. We made these major policy changes to how we vote, but we did not make concurrent changes to how we secure this new voting process from potential fraud. The result of all these changes is that our voting process, from registration to casting a ballot, takes place entirely outside the supervision of any local election officials. People register not with their town clerk or their JP necessarily, but online or at the DMV. Our ballots are mailed out not by our local election officials from our districts, but from the state from a central location, and delivered not by a local election official who can ensure the ballots are given to the correct or even a valid voter, but by the U.S. Postal Service. The ballots are not filled out in a private election booth monitored by local election officials able to guarantee no outside influence is brought to bear on the voter, and the ballot is returned via mail or an anonymous drop box without any election official witnessing who returned the ballot. This entire process happens with no supervision, no chain of custody, and when election officials do enter the picture, they have no tools available, no voter ID, no signature check, nothing that enables them to verify that the ballot was filled out and returned by the voter to whom it was being credited. Now, when pressed, election officials, town and city clerks admit that with our current system, they have no way of detecting, let alone stopping, absentee ballot fraud from taking place in Vermont. In official testimony before the Vermont House and Senate Government Operations Committee in 2021, the then Director of Elections stated if someone got hold of another person's ballot, filled it out, signed their name, and mailed that ballot in, and I quote, it will be processed, and the, paraphrasing, voter for whom the ballot was intended, and paraphrasing, will be crossed off the checklist as having voted. Now consider that with roughly 500,000 ballots being mailed out to every voter on the checklist in a general election, in a high turnout election, as the Secretary pointed out, where we get 65 to 70% of the people participating, that means we are putting 150, and this is in a high turnout election, 150 to 175,000 unwanted, unclaimed, and misdirected ballots just floating around out there with no supervision and a potential for mischief attached to each one. Now, granted, most of these unclaimed ballots will not be ill-used, but if just 5% of 150,000 find their way into the wrong hands, that's 7,500 votes, more than the difference in our last gubernatorial election, with over 1,500 to spare. The implications for the State House and Senate elections are even more daunting, where just a handful of votes often separates winner from losers. If we're going to give voters new tools that allow us to participate in elections more conveniently, that is great. But when we do, we also need to give election officials new tools that allow them to independently verify that these new procedures are safe, accurate, free from fraud, such as voter ID. And we have not done that yet. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. So let's just jump into this. So I'll start with you, Rob. What are the top 2 claims you believe are most important for Vermonters to understand, and what's your strongest evidence for that?
Well, I think the strongest claim is we don't have any sort of verification process in place that election officials can use to verify that a vote is been cast by the one person to whom it is being attributed. You know, that goes to the one person, one vote. If I get, and this was the example that was brought up in the committee, it says, what if I get a ballot for somebody else who is, it could be my spouse, it could be my adult child, it could be the person who lived in the house before me and they, for some reason, haven't been taken off the checklist and their ballot was improperly sent to me. If I fill that out and send it in, sign their name, because I know their name because it's on the envelope that was delivered to my house, you need to give the election official some sort of tool that can say, yeah, that's really Rob. And we don't have that. And so that, did I answer your question, or did I leave part of it out?
I just want to know what
Yeah.
the top 2 or 3 claims were.
Yeah.
How would you address those claims, Secretary?
So there is a phrase that we've probably all heard, which is that you can't prove a negative. I think the Latin phrase that academics use is ad ignorantium, which basically says that a claim that a premise is true simply because it hasn't been proven false doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? I could tell you that I have a dragon living in my garage, and you can't prove that I don't. Simply claiming that election fraud has happened or could happen, in my view, is not enough to justify the potential for disenfranchising voters. I live in a rural part of the state where many of the people who live in my community commute 45 minutes or an hour to another town to work. And they have to leave before the polls open at 10 in the morning, and they have to get home and get their kids from daycare and get them home and get them dinner, and they can't necessarily get to the polls before 7 p.m. when it closes. Those people are the people for whom the convenience of vote by mail makes the difference between them being able to participate and not.
Great. Ron, what would be your top 2 or 3 claims that are strongest evidence for, against your voter integrity or your questionable?
One of the things that I'd like to point out is that I've worked with some other people to take a look at the data, and there's a difference between claims of fraud and just things that cause us to raise our eyebrows. Okay. One of if you look at the top 2, just from the report itself, we've got 30,000 undeliverable addresses on our voter rolls. And we've got some 8,500 people that have been registered in the National Change of Address database that are no longer, living in those places. Just off the cuff here, we did have a crew of canvassers to try and validate this information around Chittenden County. And we managed to talk to people at some 300 addresses. And we did, in fact, find over 300 people at those addresses who no longer live there.
Okay.
So that just tells you that there's a lot of looseness in the system with ballots floating all around. And if you're someone who is trying to tip the scale, that's exactly what you need.
John, what are the top 2 or 3 claims that you would make about the election integrity?
Well, I think it's worth just noting that our system is well designed to catch bad guys. I think there's potential problems you could line up across the board, top to bottom of the process. I participate every year out at DEF CON, the Voting Village, and DEF CON is the biggest hacker conference in the world. And one of the things we do at Voting Village, the thing we do at Voting Village, is hack voting machines, which is just too much fun. So there's certainly, there's honor system points in all of the process. There's places where things could go wrong. There's places where things could be messed with. And I don't want to, I'm not trying to make anybody feel scared about this, but it's a human process. And there's going to be places where human error can pop up, mischief maybe. And I think that's why the strength of our system is that it's there to catch error. If somebody tries to vote twice, the system's going to catch them. If somebody votes on behalf of somebody else and then that person comes in and they try to vote, well, the system's found something wrong. I've had a couple people come in, early voters, and they weren't trying to, defraud the system at all, but each of them came in to vote, and I said, you've already voted. And they're like, no, I didn't. And I went back and I got the early ballot envelopes they had and could show them their signatures, and they just forgot. So that kind of thing happens. And I think our system's strength is that it's there to catch that. And if you catch it, you can look to see if there's a systemic error going on. If there's 1 or 2 or 3 here, human error most likely, the imperfect system. If there's a lot, you've got a problem. So far, I haven't seen that there's a lot, and I do have some concerns about the study, which I just looked at recently in terms of, as someone who used to do mass mailing, how NCOA and DPV were used. They're not really used in that way. You can't necessarily, you need 2 tags,
We'll hit that,
flags to
John,
come.
we'll hit that later because not everyone's aware of this
Oh,
study.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Well, I don't
So-
want to get
Yeah,
into it
John.
because we could go on with that
Yeah.
forever, but I just do have some some concerns about that study, but I'm glad people are looking.
Yep. I think we'll move on to the next topic here, how Vermont rolls actually work, the mechanics and the life cycle. Now, this is something that was really interesting to me because I didn't quite understand it. And when the secretary came on the show, she stayed afterwards and explained it to me. So can you walk us through the voter roll life cycle in Vermont and how records are created, they're updated, they're flagged and removed?
Yep.
And the statutory requirements, which I didn't understand.
Yeah, everything about how municipal clerks maintain the voter registration rolls and how we support them in doing that is very strictly controlled by statute. And we train town, cities, and town and city clerks to follow those statutes with detailed procedures that help them understand what they can and can't do. So how is a voting record created? People can register to vote either in person at their town clerk's office or at a voter registration drive or at a naturalization ceremony. They can register to vote online through our online voter registration portal, and they can register to vote at the Department of Motor Vehicles. So those are different ways that people can get themselves on the voter registration rolls. And then there are similar state and federal laws that dictate how people can be, how they can come off the voter registration rolls. I think one of the best tools that we have to ensure that people in this universal vote by mail day and age are not voting in two different places in the same election is that state-maintained online voter registration system, because our election management system requires that when someone comes on election day to register to vote on election day, their clerk can look to see if they are registered in any other town or city in Vermont, and also whether they have already cast a ballot in that community. And in that case, they would be told, I'm sorry, you cannot. You cannot register to vote and vote here today. So that is an important part of how folks get onto the voter registration list. The way that you, as a town or city clerk, might remove someone from the voter registration list is probably something that John can talk about forever and ever. But the state and federal laws that I was referring to dictate that we don't do any mass purging of the voter registration rolls within 90 days of an upcoming election. Okay, and so in Vermont statute, it requires all of our town and city clerks to do a biennial checklist review, which means they sit down with the Board of Civil Authority in their community. That's many people who are well connected within their community, and they go through the list and identify who may have moved, who might be needing to be challenged. If someone hasn't participated in a number of elections, they might challenge them simply because they don't think that that person is still living here because they used to vote regularly and now they don't. Those biennial checklist reviews are supported by our office, and I can assure you that our elections team spent a lot of time chasing down 247 municipal clerks to get them to finish that biennial checklist review. We were able to certify that 245 communities asserted that they did the checklist review, and we're still in communications with the other two who have not yet certified. One of them, I believe, was because they had a special school bond vote in December, so they couldn't do the checklist review in September, October.
John, from your perspective as a city and town, as a city clerk, what are some of the reasons that the data becomes, questionable to you, and how does that process look like at the ground level?
Oh, the biggest thing is just how long it can take for us to get people off the rolls if they've moved away. That's challenging, and that can just look bad to people. And it's, when you have a bigger town like Montpelier, and you do have the Board of Civil Authority sit down and go over the checklist, they're not going to be as effective as they would be in a smaller town where you're going to know more people. So we really depend on that process. We depend on seeing that somebody hasn't voted in a certain amount of elections, in 2 general elections, which means we can begin the process of getting them off the rolls, which is a long process. Now, when we challenge them in that process, they can't vote unless they come and they sign an affidavit swearing, no, I really do live here, and then you get a ballot. But still, they're on the voting rolls. Granted, they're not active, but they're there. And it's frustrating to see. It's frustrating for people to see. And that's, I mean, you know, there are the little things that annoy people, like we haven't picked up that they've moved yet because they didn't let us know. Or, you know, somebody's middle initial is wrong or something like that. But really the thing that gets to people, I think, more than anything, is seeing somebody on the rolls and they can say like, no, that person, they shouldn't be on there. And it's like, oh, wow, well, thanks for telling us, but we haven't been able to take them off yet because they haven't responded to us and told us that they're not there. But I think that's it.
Yeah, I think the point that is important for folks to remember is that once a voter goes into that challenge status, they are no longer automatically mailed a ballot. Right. So they have to show up in person, and in that act of showing up in person, then the clerk has the opportunity to confirm that they still live here.
Rob, you expressed a lot of concern about the cleaning up the rolls and things like that. How would you prioritize, and what would that look like?
Yeah, and I understand why it's difficult to take people off the rolls, and I understand the frustrations. I have some of them myself in my own family with my adult kids who've both sadly moved out of Vermont and both remain on the rolls. And I finally got the challenge to stick for this last cycle at town meeting after 2 years. But that I think is a reason why it's so important to have some sort of voter ID component for these ballots, because if somebody got a hold of my daughter's ballot or my son's ballot before they were challenged, and we did get at least 2 elections where they were mailed a ballot after they had left and registered to vote in New York and registered to vote in Washington State. And they're 25 and 27 now, so they do not care about writing their clerk.
They didn't listen to Dad when Dad said, here's the number, you should call the clerk.
They did not listen to Dad when I forwarded but that's the other thing. I mean, the challenge letter for my son came 2 years after he'd moved to Washington State. So if it weren't us, his parents still living in the house, it would not have been forwarded, because the forwarding only lasts for, I think, a year.
Well,
or
ballots
6
are not
months.
forwarded anyway.
They shouldn't be forwarded. No, this was the challenge letter.
Oh, okay.
Not the ballot. This was the
Gotcha.
challenge letter. So if, let's say we had moved away and my kid's ballot showed up at the house, somebody could fill them out and send them in. And because my kids are good citizens, they have registered to vote in their new homes and do vote, they could be, that's a felony for voting twice. And they would be on record as having voted in Vermont and having voted in Washington or New York State.
And even with that fact, they wouldn't call the clerk and say, take me off the list.
Hey, kids are kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, my son registered to vote in Maine, and he has my same name. Now I'm getting all the text messages, people soliciting campaign donations in Maine. Ron, so what are you've expressed concerns about the ballots and roller and cleaning up the roll. What are your top 2 things there about cleaning up the rolls?
Well, first of all, I'm certainly aware of the process of removing people from the rolls and the reasons behind that. I understand that. I'm actually more worried about the technology end of things. I think if you've got someone who has an interest in tipping the scales, they're going to need to do so on a pretty wide scale. Okay. So I'm actually looking at this more from the standpoint of the systems, the points of vulnerability in the system, and ways that those things can slip through without people noticing. One of the things I'm not sure if everybody is aware of, but like 2/3 of our votes in a general election are submitted early. So we're talking about the vast majority of our votes that actually come in by mail or through a drop box. They're not somebody actually showing up at the polls. I know we've got stories of people showing up and I forgot that I voted, or I maybe I filled out a ballot for Aunt Sally who's 95 and couldn't get to the polls anyway. I don't really think that those things are the things that are going to tip an election result. I think that if it's happening outside of our normal systems. And I would want to take a look at the things that will tell us whether or not that's happening and to be satisfied.
Okay.
You know, on that point too, I know people come at this from usually one of two directions. I mean, this looks like it's a partisan issue, except both parties have been complaining about election integrity for, 26 years now, at least. So when you're coming at it from the standpoint of this is the way that it works, or this has worked pretty well for us for a number of years, versus someone who is not quite on board with that, hopefully what we can do is try and look at and address the concerns from each party, rather than simply dismiss one or the other. I just think that point needs to be made in this discussion.
Well, let's see, we'll move on to absentee ballots and chain of custody. So, John, from the town clerk level, what does that look like? How do absentee ballots have come in? What does the chain of custody look like to you before they get sent to the secretary's office?
Well, they go in the vault, locked up, away from everybody else. I now have their own secure special room that they go into now, which I'm very, very proud of adding because my vault was too small. They stay there until we're going to bring them out and tabulate them. And we can do that during the election, and we get, members of the Board of Civil Authority, justices of the peace. They work in pairs. They open those in such a way that nobody can see and identify a voter with a ballot, so that anonymity stays. And we do that even if we're doing it, we do early tabulation. We always make sure there's two people doing everything. And ideally of different political persuasions there. We can't always do that in Montpelier because everybody's a Democrat.
Yeah.
And then, again, two people will feed them through the tabulators.
And how do you check that? So, because we got a question from the audience member, perfect timing, is how do you verify that mail-in ballot? Is there any about you receive it and then it gets processed?
Yeah, we put it in the machine and we process. And as I said before, the system is really designed to catch mischief. Preventing it, I appreciate Rob's concerns. It's tough because, as you say, what do you say, Aunt Sally, was it? I forget the aunt's name.
Fictitious.
I do hear the question of, what if someone has dementia or something and their spouse asks for their ballot and votes on it. It's hard because people with dementia still have a right to vote, and you do have the right to get someone to help you vote. But, some states have processes where someone can lose the right to vote, which is a scary, scary thing. But it is a problem that is not necessarily able to be caught, and that's why you have to have a system that will identify if people are starting to do that kind of thing, if two people try to vote under the same name.
So when you get it, so I think we get it, there's not, you can't really verify it, but you'll count it, you'll open it up, and it's tabulated absolutely correctly.
Right, and we have signatures.
Sure.
So if there's an issue, if somebody comes in, we do have the potential to verify signature. We don't do signature verification per se, but that's something that in an investigation, I'm sort of speculating here because I've never been involved in an investigation, but that's something that certainly could be compared.
Ron, what about your concerns about the chain of custody and the absentee ballots? And we'll get to you, Rob. I know you're all over that one.
Well, one of the things that, again, from the perspective that I'm looking at this, number one, you don't actually need the original ballot to cheat. You have a voter checklist, which is basically public information. You also have ballot images. Not sure about the process where those images get from the town clerk to the vendors that actually print those ballots and mail them out and so forth. But my question is, these are electronic resources that are very easy to transfer. And what's keeping us from, what's keeping those things from being transferred to the wrong hands is essentially what it is. The other thing to look at this, if you're talking about players that want to have an influence on the election, they probably have, number one, they've got a copy of the voter checklist. They probably also have information about what races they expect to be able to have some influence on. And they also have a list of people who they do not expect to vote for whatever reason. And those are the ballots that can certainly be filled out, mailed in, and once they're in the system, they're legitimate. They're on the register, the voter registry. So how do you separate those out?
Rob, what's your take on this, though?
Yeah,
the chain of custody and the absentee ballots?
Yeah, there really isn't any chain of custody until you get to the counting process. When people vote in person, they show up at the polls, they identify themselves to the person when they come in, and even if that's just their face, I know we don't have voter ID, but the clerk knows me, so yeah, that's him. Give him a ballot. I take my ballot, and my election officials and the community members are watching me go into that booth, so they know that there's nobody looking over my shoulder telling me how to vote or twisting my ear. I fill it out. I put it in the machine and I check out. So there's a chain of custody that you can verify that I am who I say I am, live where I say I live. I have placed my vote with no outside influence, and I've turned it in, and I voted once. That's the perfect system. Now, I do think, I don't have a problem with mail ballots or blockchain, or if we could figure out a way to make it work telepathically, I'd be for it, so long as we could have a chain of custody and it would be, and it would be verifiable. But now, it's, when the ballots are mailed out, there's nobody supervising any aspect of that process until it arrives and then is counted. And interestingly, John mentioned the early counting of early ballots. If I did steal somebody's ballot and fill it out fraudulently and send it in, because we have early counting, if that's processed before the real person shows up to vote, you can't even tease that fraudulent vote out of the final count. There's no way to do that. So, and again, I'm not worried about I am worried about somebody stealing my son's ballot and my daughter's ballot or Aunt Sally's ballot, but I had a conversation with a postal worker who said, I am gathering up hundreds of ballots that are being sent to people who I know don't live there anymore. I could collect every one of these things and keep them and sell them or fill them out myself and influence the outcomes of elections. So that's the scale of this that really has me worried.
Secretary, it's coming back to you. What are the main controls that Vermont has and relies on to prevent this misdirection, duplication, and improper return of ballots?
So I take exception to the notion that there is no chain of custody. The vendor who mails our general election ballots maintains possession of those ballots, keeps the ballot images under strict control and protection. And when they package up ballots to be mailed out, they deliver them personally to a mail sorting facility, either in White River Junction or in Burlington. And then it is only the United States Postal Service that has access to them until they are delivered to the recipient's mailbox. And this notion that there are postal workers who would go out there and gather up a bunch of undeliverable ballots and sell them or fill them out and mail them back in is really outrageous. I think that the United States Postal Service workers know that that would be committing perjury by signing that ballot envelope and saying that I am this person who was supposed to receive the ballot. They know that they would lose their job in that scenario. And so to think that this is happening on any wide scale when they have very strict and specific instructions about how to treat election mail differently than they treat normal mail in that if it is undeliverable, truly undeliverable, because they know the person no longer lives there, they are under strict instructions that that ballot gets returned back to the town or city clerk's office where that voter would be casting a ballot, so that that town or city clerk can begin the process of either figuring out where that person has moved to or begin the process of challenging them so that they can't automatically get a ballot in future elections. Look, what we know about how our elections are able to be secured is that we know we have 247 duly sworn town and city clerks, one of them sitting to my right, who take an oath of office to uphold the laws and the procedures of our elections. And we have complicated processes that are built off of the statutes that direct us how we do our jobs. And all of those people and processes are working together to make sure that our elections work. There's one other set of people who are a part of this solution as well, and that's every one of you and every one of us sitting up here. Because if we see something that looks improper, that seems like it might not be right, it is our job to report that to your town or city clerk, to our office, to the Attorney General's office, to the FBI. If you see something, you should say something. The one last thing that I'll say, and then I'm sure that the moderator wants to get on to another question, you can track your ballot. You can go on to vote.vermont.gov. That is your voter portal in Vermont. You can see where you're registered to vote. You can see who your clerk is, what your polling hours are. You can request your absentee ballots for non-general elections because it won't automatically come in August, or for your local elections. But you can also see the date that your ballot was dropped at the mail processing facility, so you can track and see how long it takes it to get to your home from Burlington or White River Junction, wherever it was received by USPS. And then you can also track your ballot when it is returned back to your clerk. So if you drop it in a drop box, you can look at the voter portal the end of that day, or maybe the next day, depending on how many hours a week your clerk works. And you can see that your ballot was checked in, received. You could also see perhaps that your ballot was marked defective because maybe you forgot to sign your ballot envelope or you forgot to date it. If it was defective, then you can contact your clerk and you can clear that defection so that your ballot is counted. So it's not true that there is absolutely no tracking, and it is not true that there is absolutely no chain of custody, because within the constraints of the laws that we have, those are the ways that we know how to see where our ballots are.
Great. So Ron and John, back to the technology aspect of tracking and data and where does it go? What would you like to see done differently? If there's a system in place that the secretary just described, we can track the individual ballots. What else is there technology-wise? Either one of you can go first that you would see to make you feel more secure.
Well, I'm more of a hardware guy, although I'm about to give you a software answer, I guess. As I say, I've done a lot of work with the actual tabulators, and I think, and I'm not going to speak to our tabulators specifically, but I think this is a nationwide issue, so I'm going to sort of speak at the larger scale. I think a lot of the tabulators used in this country are somewhat dated and need to be patched. I'd like to see a more robust standards state by state, and those are state by state standards for keeping robust, secure voting machines we can be comfortable with. But really, I was just at the conference of an organization called the Election Verification Network. Great bunch of people, and they have made me big believers in audits, all about audits, audit. So the only thing that I might recommend more is doing a few more audits. We audit randomly in this state, and maybe we should be auditing a few more. Maybe we should also put on a parallel track of regular audits so we make sure that everybody gets covered in a certain amount of time. But I'm an audit guy now. I'm a born-again audit guy, so I think the most we can do with that, the better.
How about you, Ron? You said you looked at a lot of data and the data sets and things like that, audits and logs and keeping track of the balance.
Well, first of all, I want to point out that I've been through, I've helped out at the polls. I've seen the process. I've helped count afterwards and seen the things that are in place. There is no doubt in my mind that the people who are engaged in these roles, they take their job seriously. And there's nothing that I have seen that would indicate anything other than that. The point that I would like to emphasize is that if damage is being done, it's being done before we get to the vote, before the ballot shows up at the town clerk's office. Okay, and these things are going to be systemic and under the radar. So I love your comment about audits. That's actually one of my major points. And actually, I think there's a very simple solution to a lot of these concerns, which I hope to get to. But for now, just so people understand what has been happening, I would like to see a scouring of the registry system and server logs. I would like to see a regular scan of net changes in the registry data from one day to the next. I think that we are certainly capable technically for understanding who is making changes to the registry and when. What I've seen in helping candidates with the voter data over the years is that the registry grows fairly dramatically prior to an election. And then even after the election, we get a significant drop in the list of registered voters. So that's a lot of change to kind of keep track of as we're going through the busyness of preparing for and keeping control of the election itself.
Rob, you haven't talked to.
So my big point is that yes, there's an audit role, but I think it's a fairly technical one. And it has to do with who's making changes to the registry data, because that's the heart of the system. By the time you get the ballot, it's too late.
Rob, real quick, you were shaking your head. When
Oh,
Rob
I was just agreeing. I don't have anything that I can add to that. I think they've both spoken very well to it.
Secretary?
Yep, I think it's important for folks to understand that there are very strict controls on who can access our voter registration system. Our elections team has the ability to see the activity of adding voters or transferring a voter from one community to another and the pace that is happening. We watched that happen as communities were participating in their biennial checklist reviews, and we could see from our dashboard in real time how many voters were being moved, how many were being challenged, and we know exactly who's logged in to our voter registration system because that's part of the controls that were built into the system in order to ensure that nobody who is not authorized to have access is gaining access to that system.
Can I make one more point on that?
Yeah, good.
I understand the amount of work that is being done to try and ensure the integrity of our rolls, okay, and the work that is needed in order to legitimately remove somebody from those rolls. But if my concerns are at all valid, then what takes us 4 years to execute in terms of removing people from the rolls who should be removed can be undone in a matter of minutes. So that's the technical challenge that I'm talking about.
So what we covered real quick so far is we talked about election integrity. We talked about the voter rolls and the process of cleaning up those voter rolls. And everyone admits that's a long process. And John, you spoke to how long that is by actually being in that seat as well. We spoke about the voting process and the absentee ballots and the chain of custody, right? There's concern about the chain of custody, but there's a vote. What was that again, Secretary? I didn't even know you can track your ballot.
Oh, vote.vermont.gov. That is your voter portal where you can see exactly where your ballot
That's
is.
been submitted, if you can check that. And then we were talking also about the chain of custody and the breakdowns in those chain of custodies. Basically what you were talking to, Rob, where you're getting these ballots and someone could maliciously fill out those ballots, right? So, and that's possible, right? I don't think anyone disagrees, right? My son had a ballot sent to our house still, and I could have, if I had the wherewithal, I could have sent it in. So let's just grab a couple questions that the audience submitted. And let's see, this one here is, and we'll ask, this will be for everyone. Do you think only citizens should vote? We'll just go right down the line.
Yes.
Only citizens?
It's in our Constitution.
Yes, for state and federal elections, only United States citizens should be allowed to vote. The Vermont legislature has extended local voting rights to non-citizens in certain communities, and that was by request of the community itself, vetted through the legislative process. So there are some communities where all residents are able to participate, Montpelier being one of them.
Ron?
Generally, yes, I agree that only citizens should be able to vote. I do have a question on the non-citizens voting in various communities, which is, do we have
That's the next question.
protections in place that make sure that those people do not vote in anything other than the local votes?
John?
Yep.
Sure. Real quick answer to yours, and then to answer that question. It's illegal for citizens to vote on federal elections. It's illegal for them to vote in state elections, and I agree with both of those things completely. The reason why in Montpelier the community asked the legislature to allow non-citizens to vote is, in a sense, they were considering them citizens of Montpelier, even if they weren't citizens of Vermont. They weren't citizens of the U.S., but these are folks whose, their kids go to school there, they own property there, they live there for 20 years, and the community wanted to see that for purposes of making its own decisions on its own issues only. Not even, in our case, not even the school is involved.
So we're going to come right back down the line. So the next question that just popped up was, how do you ensure non-citizen voters in a particular community don't vote in a federal election?
Sure.
And we'll come down the line.
Well, first of all, a federal election comes along, they're not even on the checklist. We have two separate checklists that we have to keep. One of them for our municipal elections, which has the non-citizens on it, and one that doesn't. So we only use the checklist with the non-citizens for municipal elections. And then when they come up, we share a ballot with our schools, so they get a special ballot I printed out for them that only has the municipal questions. So, and also, I tell my folks checking in voters, if there's anything unusual, if there's a letter in any one of these columns that says challenged, or they haven't done their oath, or they're a non-citizen, anything on that list, they send them to me. So myself and my deputy are the ones who personally check them off the checklist and personally hand them their ballot.
Ron, have you seen that process?
Really, it's an unknown for me. I don't know how we are tracking citizenship, when it comes to our election systems. And that's really my question. I would certainly think that local questions would be on a separate ballot. What I don't know is whether or not any of the voters that are in our regular voter checklist are non-citizens. I have no visibility to that.
Secretary?
I would say most definitively, no. We do not have people who are registered to vote in this state who are non-citizens. And the reason for that is very logical. If you think from the standpoint of someone who came here from somewhere else, is living and working, maybe raising a family, maybe you own a business, and you wish to stay here, you are not going to commit a deportable offense, and one that would preclude you from ever being able to become a citizen in order to cast one ballot. And I have plenty of statistics about the states across the country who have done deep dive analyses of their voter registration rolls to try to identify non-citizens who were registered and casting ballots. And I'd be happy to run through that, but that wasn't the question that was asked. Happy to do it if it comes up in a future question. It is not a problem.
Rob, your thoughts? Have you seen this process? I'm not aware of
I
it.
haven't seen it in Montpelier or was it
Burlington and Winooski.
But Burlington and Winooski, I'm not familiar. But the one thing that the secretary just brought up is that issue of a non-citizen registering to vote and putting their ability to be in the country at risk. And I did have a reader of one of the subscribers to my Substack column, contacted me after I wrote an article about this, said that his wife is Canadian, she wants to become a U.S. citizen. She was signed up to vote without her knowledge at the DMV. And, you know, that's one of the dangers of having that opt-in or opt-out instead of an opt-in at the DMV, is that poor woman was just terrified. The ballot showed up and she says, I didn't register to vote. Why is this here? This could put my status at risk.
Take me off the list.
Take me off the list.
Immediately,
And
right.
that's what she did. But it was a really scary process for her. And if somebody else, if she had gotten the ballot and said, oh, I don't know what, filled it out, send it in, didn't know, that could have been a bad thing.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
just experienced something like that. I have a special needs daughter that needed to get a driver, not a driver's license. She couldn't drive. Everyone knows who she is, but she got a Vermont ID, and next thing I know, she got a ballot in the mail, and I was like, oh, I didn't. I asked my wife, I said, what happened? How did this happen?
Yeah. So we are working all the time with our partners at the Department of Motor Vehicles to make sure that they are, that the frontline workers are well trained in really respecting that opt-out. Because if you are fleeing a domestic violence situation and you do not want to register to vote because you don't want to appear on the public checklist where your violent spouse might be able to find you, if you are a non-citizen who is hoping someday to be able to gain citizenship, you may rightfully, or maybe you just don't want to vote. But we are really stressing to the DMV frontline folks how important it is to make sure that they get that right and that they double and triple check that. In fact, I filmed a short video with the commissioner of the Department of Motor Vehicles today that's going to become part of their training material for their frontline clerks.
Here's another question.
Can I make just one suggestion on that point to the secretary while I have her ear? What if we said if somebody did not opt out, that the DMV official would have to administer the voter's oath to that person? Then they'd know what's going on.
Well, Vermont law is such that you can administer the voter's oath to yourself. So you can go onto the Vermont voter portal. You can attest to that oath through the Vermont voter portal. You don't need another human being to do it. I think there are ways that we can consider making that that point of contact in the Department of Motor Vehicles a little bit more foolproof. But as has been said earlier in this panel, these are human beings, and human beings sometimes make mistakes. Sometimes it is the voter themselves who neglected to opt out, didn't read carefully that it says by opting in, you attest that you are 18 years old and that you are a United States citizen. And then I've heard other people explain that there are people who've come here from other parts of the world where the deference to an authority figure means that you always just say yes to any question on any form, regardless of what it is. And, we know that people have been accidentally added to the voter rolls, and we know that when they realize that, they ask to be taken off immediately.
Secretary, this question goes right towards you. I think you're the one that can answer this one. Is showing voter identification. Mm-hmm. Why not? Why don't we do that?
Yeah. So voter identification, there are ways that we could do this as a state, as a nation, if we really wanted to. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to for me is that the cost of a $145 driver's license should not be the thing that stands between you and your ability to vote. And so if we want there to be an ID requirement, then it should be the responsibility of government to provide that to the voter free of charge. And that's a conversation that I'm more than happy to participate in.
Yeah, that's one of the questions I had. I said, if we're going to have voter ID, if Congress can hold up all this funding and stuff like that, they surely can slip everyone a couple bucks to go buy.
It's decimal dust if you look at the defense budget.
Well, Dan, I'm going to ask you a question, because you said your daughter who's special needs got a non-driver's license. How much did that cost?
I didn't even know she got it.
Oh,
I don't even know what my electric bill is.
You didn't know she got it?
No, I don't know.
The fact
I think it's like 30, but I literally don't.
$30, and it shouldn't even be $30. I agree with you that if we're going to have a voter ID component, it should be provided for by the government if you can't if you don't already have a driver's license, if you don't already have a passport, social security number, last four numbers of your social security, something like that. But it's really not a controversial issue. In fact, there was just a CNN story talking about the National Save Act that said they looked at Pew polls going back 5 years, and it was like 79%, 82%, 83% support voter ID. And they looked at partisanship, and it was for majorities of Democrats, for majorities of Republicans, for majorities of independents. And they looked across racial demographic lines, and it was the majority of black voters, a majority of Hispanic voters, all in favor of voter ID because it's a common sense safeguard. If we want to have, vote by mail, just, put your driver's license number on there, or a state-supplied voter ID number.
Secretary, is that a statute, though?
Yes.
Of the voter ID?
Yes,
And
that would
have
be
to-
against
That would
Vermont
have
law.
to change the whole statute? Here's a question that crushes me. For each of you, do you each feel comfortable in our current electoral process? And if not, why? And this is just crushing to me. I've worked all over the world with governments and businesses, and this is just a terrible question to ask. Rob?
Well, I've been yapping, so why don't we go to the other end?
Hey, John? Go ahead, John.
I do. I would probably be making myself look very bad if I said I didn't, but I very much do. I wouldn't have this job if I didn't think I had confidence in it. Do I think it could be better? Yeah. And I think, like I say, I go to DEF CON all the time, and what we are is penetration testing democracy. And I think it should be, I think folks like Ron need to be looking into this stuff, even if I don't necessarily agree with your report, okay. Sorry. But that's part of what makes it good, is that we're all paying attention, we're all engaged, we're all participating. Sometimes that means asking questions. It's vital that we ask questions. But I feel very strongly that, you look at the numbers of fraud. They're very, very low. I think right now, if anything, if you're going to balance off access to the polls versus security, and that is your balance. You add more security and you block more people from voting. You open the door to more people to vote. Maybe a few more fraudsters get in. I think with the fraud numbers so small, right now it's really skewed the other way. We really don't have enough of our eligible voters coming out to vote. And if that balance starts to skew the other way demonstrably, then you're going to have people like me. You'll have me, but everyone else in my position being the first ones coming up to say, look, the balance is skewed the other way now. Let's tighten, go in this direction, and bring it back over more here. And right now, I'm just comfortable that we've got a good system and we've got the right priorities.
Ron, how about yourself?
First of all, I don't think I would be here if I was comfortable with the election system. So that's why this panel discussion is so interesting. One of the things about the report that we put together, by the way, it was Brian Christie and I that did most of the work on that report. We got some help from Cause of America, particularly where it relates to data from other states. One of the things that you can say you can agree or disagree with that report, but what we've done is we've tried to highlight the anomalies that we found, and we think those numbers are significant. Anybody who looks at a system and sees those kinds of numbers would probably raise an eyebrow. And collectively, they represent roughly 14% of our registered voters. That list is not complete by any means. Okay, so the point is that there's a bunch of stuff there, and what I've provided as part of that report is all of the queries that I use to derive the answers. Okay. So anybody, not just me, anybody can go in, and if you've got access to the data, then you can verify those results. And if you find something different, I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah. Secretary, you're comfortable with the system?
I really want to
hope so.
respond to what he just said, but I'm going to answer the question instead, because as I said at the beginning of this event, my team reviewed all of the categories of anomalies that were highlighted in the report and found that there was nothing about those anomalies that appears to be outside of legal procedures. So on, am I comfortable with the system that we have? I am absolutely 100% comfortable with the people and the processes that are in place right now and the dedication of the 247 municipal clerks who are just militant about following the procedures, following the laws that we have. The level at which I'm not comfortable is when we come to an election where 30, 40, 50, or 60% of Vermonters aren't participating. And that's why a lot of the focus of our office is about voter education and voter engagement, so that you know you can go to the voter portal and find out where you're registered and take the voter's oath if you haven't, or transfer your registration to the new community that you live in. But this year, we will also be doing a universal voter guide for the general election, so that when your ballot comes to you in late September, early October, you will also get a voter guide that has all of the candidates and issues that are on your ballot in the order that they're on your ballot, so that you can spend the 30 to 45 days that you have with your ballot reaching out to those candidates and telling them what you think is important. Maybe something you heard tonight you think is important, and you want to reach out to your House or Senate candidates and ask them that question when they're running for office this year. I hope that with empowering voters, we will be able to make it possible for more Vermonters to participate in our election, so that when we get closer to 100%, we know what the will of the people is.
Rob?
Well, I vote every chance I get, so I guess I have enough confidence in the system to participate in it all the time. But I really do think we need to do better. I really do think we need to do better, particularly when it comes down to our state house and Senate elections, because the story that I always tell is my friend, and you served with him, David Ainsworth, lost his seat in 2010 to another person you served with, Sarah Buxton, by one vote in 2010. And in 2016, David Ainsworth won the seat back from Sarah Buxton by one vote. So every vote counts in our elections. Don't let anybody tell you that your vote doesn't matter, because in Vermont elections, they always do. But, one thing that you said at the beginning, Madam Secretary, was that I can't, if you tell me there's a dragon in your garage, I can't prove that there's not. But I can if you give me the tools to look inside your garage, and I can tell you that there's not a dragon in there. Or maybe I'll tell you that there is a dragon in there if you put a camera or let me go in the door. And that's where my confidence level would rise, is if we had those mechanisms in place, that something to give those, because I agree with everybody saying that the town clerks and election officials are they're spot on, doing their job, they take it very seriously. But we need to give them a tool. So when that absentee ballot comes in, they can look on it and say, yeah, that's Rob's signature, though I don't like signature check. I think it's weird. Or that's Rob's driver's license number, or yes, he's included a picture of himself on his ID, or something. So those election officials have that tool to say, yeah, that's right. That's the one person who's voted one time.
So there's another question here. Does the potential of disenfranchisement outweigh the potential of voter fraud?
Oh, back to me?
Yeah, we'll just go right down
All right,
the line.
back to me. I think we have gone way too far to the balance side of convenience, and we need to bring a little bit more security back into the mix.
Secretary?
I think there are vastly more people in Vermont who don't participate in our elections than the number of incidents of even suspected fraud that just turns out to be an irregularity. So I think we still need more people participating.
Ron?
I think one of the reasons we're here tonight is because there are enough people that are concerned about this issue that to actually justify this conversation. I believe that not having trust in the system is just as disenfranchising as making it difficult to get your vote in.
John?
Well, I agree with that, but I think a big part of having trust in the system is trust in the idea that our candidates are truly the candidates that are the choice, the preference of the majority of voters. And because that is so important, I think that's the most fundamental point of confidence. I think we're skewed way over on the wrong side. I think we need more people voting. I think the more people we get voting, the more we have to be asking these questions and keep our eyes open. But right now, I think that's, as I did with the balance
Sure.
there, we need more people voting.
Here's a great question. We're going to start with you, John, over there. So the same-day voter registration, how do we ensure and validate that ballot? And can it be how do you correct it if it's a invalid ballot? Since you're right there, same-day registration, person comes in, registers to vote, does their thingy. How do you find out later on that person, was it from the wrong town or something? I don't know.
Oh, well, I am a fan of same-day registration. The election administrator in me gets very frustrated on it because it's a lot of work. But it's more validating. I mean, it's the same process. You register to vote, you get to vote. This time somebody's walking up to me registering to vote right in my face, and I see them walk over and get their ballot and walk to the booth. There's nothing more verifiable than that on my end. So, so that's an easy one.
Ron, same-day registrations?
Really, by the time you get to that point on voting day, when the votes are being cast, that's really not the issue. The things that I'm worried about happen before that point. So somebody coming in, I'm assuming I've already heard tonight about mechanisms that allow the officers to check and make sure that you haven't registered or voted somewhere else. So I'm basically fine with that, and I don't think that's the issue.
Secretary?
Yeah, I mean, Ron picked up on what I said earlier, which is that our central election management system allows the clerk to see, and if after the fact we see that somebody had already voted in one community and did same-day voter registration, that would be referred to the Attorney General's office. I want to say, though, that same-day voter registration worked really well for people in 2024. And anecdotally, when I hear from people who were either standing at the polls because they were holding up a campaign sign, or clerks who are, largely reluctant to talk anything having to do with partisan politics, anecdotally, same-day voter registration really benefited the change in makeup of our House and Senate, because a lot of candidates and even some clerks admit that they see people who tend to vote right, who hadn't been registered, who came and registered and voted on that day.
Rob?
I think John makes a really good point when he says that if you're voting same day or registering same day, you're voting in person. So that's I hadn't considered that. So you've flipped me on an issue.
See, you succeeded. You wanted to see if we could find.
I don't like it personally. 'Cause I personally don't like it, but I guess I'm the only one that doesn't like it. So, that the mail-in ballots, that's a typical question. The signatures on the ballots, we talked about the signature on the ballots. Should we require having signatures on the ballots? And I'll just give you a quick take on mine. My dad, 90 years old, his signature changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
His ballot got rejected because he lives in New York, and then he couldn't make it back to fix it,
Right.
to fix the ballot. So what's
Yep.
your thoughts about same day?
So-
The signature, excuse me.
So let's be clear that we should be talking about signatures on the ballot envelope, because if you sign your ballot will be discarded, because anything that is identifying the voter can't be considered a legal ballot. Signature matching is challenging for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is your signature looks different if you sign it standing up versus on the dashboard of your car as you're about to run it into the clerk's office, versus if you if the signature that someone was using to match your signature was from when you were 16, I bet it looks very different when you're 25 or 90. So signature matching is not advisable in any circumstances. largely because the town and city clerks are not forensic handwriting specialists, and they really can't judge the match well enough without being significantly more trained. And I think there's one other thing that we should talk about with respect to the signature on your ballot envelope. It's not just a signature. It's not just a way of identifying you. That is signing a form that says, under pains and penalties of perjury, this is my ballot. I have executed it. Nobody helped me. And so it's not just whether that signature is identifying who you are. That signature is saying, I swear. And that's where the prosecution happens if somebody fraudulently casts a ballot, because that signature is your promise. And those are the pieces of evidence that the Attorney General's office gathers in the event that there's a suspected case of voter fraud.
Ron?
What was the question?
The signatures on the ballots.
On
On a
ballots.
ballot,
It's
a ballot
a
on-
very difficult validation process at best. I think we need something, but if not that, then there needs to be something else.
Yes, states that do mail-in ballots, the Colorado's one, and I think, does Washington do signature check? They use signature check, but they also have other options. I don't like it for all the reasons that are stated. I think it's really squirrely. Much better just to have a driver's license number or last 4 digits of your social security number or some other identifier that can't be, changed from 16 to 95.
Yep. I went to a conference of elections administrators from all over the country, some from states where they do signature matching like Colorado. And we really, I think as an elections community, are moving more towards this notion that there are other better identifiers of you than what your signature looks like, for all the reasons that we've said. And the driver's license number, last 4, even cell phone numbers, tend to be unique to the individual, and those should be considered over signature verification.
One point of clarification, though, I think I heard that all of us were philosophically okay with voter ID. We just don't want it to be a burden to the voter. So whatever is acceptable as an ID shouldn't cost the voter anything extra. And there's a variety of ways that you can verify their identity through that.
John?
Yeah, just really quick, because I hadn't gotten this one yet. The one thing that I think could be good about signatures, that I like about signatures, is if there was an actual investigation of fraud where you brought in authorities, you could bring in the FBI or whoever, then it could be a useful piece of evidence. As some kind of at the polls election verification for an actual vote, oh my God, it's terrible.
We'll go through the line one more time. We'll start with you, John. If there was one statute, there's a lot of statutory stuff that I learned that drive me crazy. If you could make one statutory change to increase people's confidence in voter integrity, what statute would you write?
More audits.
More audits?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about you, Ron? If you had to write a statute?
I would support the existing statute, which is that the town clerks should be maintaining their own checklist. Okay.
They do.
Now, let me clarify, because the town clerks do maintain, they use the central registry system to maintain their checklist, and that satisfies their requirement from the state's perspective. But they're also absolving themselves of other sources of voter information that may be coming into that system. What I'm talking about is that the town clerk should go back to, we own the system, you have to see the town clerk or communicate with the town clerk in town to get on the list. The town can share that list with the state. There are benefits to having a central repository for all of our voter information, but it shouldn't go the other way. The state should not be feeding stuff into the town's registration list.
Secretary, what?
Well, I have to agree with John Odum that we could do more auditing. I think the audit process is a good one as it is now, and I think it could be even better if we were able to not only audit more communities' ballots, but also make it so that we can systematically make sure that over time, every community comes into that audit. Right now, it's supposed to be a random process. And, by random, that means that we could end up, auditing a community twice before we ever get to half of the state. The audits, I want you all to know, though, the audits that we do, according to statute, they happen in December of election years. They are live streamed. They are open to the public. You can come. We hold them in the House chamber at the State House so that anybody who wants to watch the process can. And you can see the recordings of those audits. They've all been made public. And so I would welcome you to watch the audits if you want to watch some paint dry. But, if you just want the spoiler alert of like what happened at the audits are generally confirming exactly what the community who voted and counted those ballots saw, with the exception of a couple of instances of human error. And oftentimes, the only difference that we see between the election official record of vote and the audit that we do a month later is in those instances where there was a write-in and somebody incorrectly, neglected to put, Bob Smith, because everybody knows him as Robert, and didn't count that, that one vote. And so the instances of any difference between what the official results are and the audit results is typically a human error.
Rob, what would a statute, if you were to write a statute, what would it be?
Easy one for me, it would be some sort of mandatory voter ID provision for casting a ballot.
Voter ID? Mm-hmm. I think the purging of the records, I think that's a huge delay. That's my own 2 cents. I get to answer that question. Does anyone have a burning question that we didn't ask that you want to ask? Yeah, I got 1,000 cards here. That's why I'm asking you.
Yeah, so my question had to do with the system called ERIC, which is a national system that some states participate in and some don't.
Yep.
And I just would like some feedback about why those states that are not participating aren't, and whether, wouldn't it be better if everyone was part of it?
Yes,
Are you
that's a
familiar?
great question. So Eric's,
So the question is about an ERIC database. I'm not sure what that is.
yeah.
And you're going to answer a question I don't even know what you're answering.
Yeah.
So what is it?
It is the electronic registration information consortium. I believe it's a consortium. It is an organization that is currently, I think, 26 states, and it allows us to share information in a very careful manner under very strict MOUs between us and ERIC as sending of data and receiving data. And what it allows us to do is it allows us to get access to records from those 25 other states for people who have moved into that state and have newly registered to vote, people who have died in that state, so that we can check to see if a Vermonter dies in Arizona and it doesn't appear on our Department of Health death record. We could see that it did appear on another state's death record. It allows us to share information from our end about who has moved here so that other states can begin the process of removing people from their voter rolls. That kind of information sharing is essential for making sure that our voter registration lists are as accurate as they can be. And frankly, I wish that every state were a part of this system. Unfortunately, in recent years, there has been a lot of disinformation and a lot of rhetoric coming from certain parts of the country about the system and why people should pull out of it. But there is no way for us to know that we can begin the process of removing someone in a timely way if they don't ever send back the challenge card that their clerk sent to them.
Or their dad.
Or if they don't listen to their dad. And ERIC, if they're moving to or from an ERIC state, we can get that process started a lot earlier.
So John, you came here for a particular reason and a concern, right? So you joined a panel. You agreed to it. What do you want people to know? You came here to participate. What are some of the myths or facts that you want everyone to know?
Oh, what are the myths and the facts? You know, one fact I would like people to know, I'm going to say something that we don't like to talk about, and that's human error. When you're talking the small level, when somebody's got the wrong, somebody hasn't let us know that they've changed their address, and they have a different address in there. When somebody, some volunteer at the table doesn't check somebody off the checklist, so your reconciliation is off by one. I think it's so easy for people to look at any imperfection and see it as malevolent and see it as some part of some scheme or something. And I think that's so disrespectful. I mean, sure to people like me, but really to the volunteers who are doing that work, because they come out and they give it their own time and it's really important to them, and they do goof up sometimes. I think that's why it's so important to have the protections that we have in place to catch errors that are systemic, that are more than just one or two. But I think a lot of people just don't understand. If they catch one thing wrong in there and they want to scream voter fraud, that hurts.
Ron, what about yourself? So you're here for a particular reason. What is it that you want to share?
I think we have a pretty serious set of procedural issues with our election systems, okay? Potentially. Again, I want to emphasize that I don't have enough data to demonstrate fraud, although I will share that as we were canvassing, I mean, we found, personally, I found an address that doesn't exist. We found various situations that, they're just questionable, okay? And we've got the data to show that. There is no question about what happens and the people that are working our elections from the point that our ballots are returned. If there's a problem with our systems, it is before that point. And we have a system that once we receive the ballots, and once we accept them because they are in the registry, we can't distinguish one ballot from another. We can't decide what's good and what's bad at that point. All of the problems are upstream.
That's your concern, is the upstream.
And that's my huge concern.
Secretary?
I am here because I was invited to be here, and because I think it's important as your elected Secretary of State that I come and answer the questions as clearly and as honestly as I can. It's the way that my team has engaged with Ron and the other authors of this report to hopefully begin a conversation that will allow us to unpack a little bit of the anomalies that they believe that they've identified, because my team and I feel pretty confident in the security of our elections and in the processes and the people who conduct our elections. And it was important to me to be here and give you all an opportunity to to ask questions in here. And so I want to say thank you for coming out tonight.
Rob?
Yeah, I think the myth that I wanted to address coming here is we always hear that election fraud or voter fraud is so rare that it's not worth considering. And the truth of the matter is we have no idea to what extent voter fraud is or isn't taking place in Vermont, because the tools are not there for our election officials to detect it. In regard to absentee ballots, and since we've moved to this new system in 2020, this is how 2/3 and growing of our ballots are cast now. Mm-hmm. So if we're going to move this in this direction and make things more convenient for people, we need to bring the security systems up to date along with the convenience.
Great. Does anyone else have a burning?
Oh boy.
We'll start first. I saw that one first.
7:30. What's your call?
7:42.
Time check. Allowing out-of-state college students register to vote. These are folks who, on the one hand, we're telling them you have to pay out-of-state tuition. On the other hand, oh, you can register to vote in our elections. And these are often people who move as soon as they graduate, so they don't often even have to live with whatever they voted on.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering about the panel's kind of thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, your eligibility to register to vote is determined by state statute, and your eligibility to get in-state tuition is determined by the college or university you're attending. So those are really two different entities to make those definitions. The definition of residency is determined by the legislature, and I bet John could probably, spout it chapter and verse because he's closer to it on a daily basis than I am. But if you are in Vermont and with the intention of staying here, even if you're only here this year or for these 4 years, you can vote. You are a legal 18-year-old United States citizen. You can register and you can vote. What would be nice is if we can make sure that when they move back to their home state after graduation or take a job in a third state, that all of those states are part of ERIC so that we can more quickly get them taken off the voter rolls.
That's the law, huh? So that makes it, so we're out of time, actually. It's 7:32. I didn't realize. What's 7:04? Oh, we're, so.
We're having so much fun. We'll just stay
We
all
are
night.
having so much fun.
It's like lost track of time here going forward. But thanks for coming. Just real quick closing comments. Rob, we'll just go down the line, just real closing.
Yeah, thank you, everybody, for coming out. This is a great crowd for a Friday night on a beautiful sunny day. It's probably dark outside now. But yeah, no, I think that these conversations are so important to have, and I do hope that everybody learns. I learned something today. John Odum changed my mind on an issue.
Yeah, somebody write that down.
So I hope that some of your minds were opened up by this conversation as well, and I do hope that we can have. I'm delighted to hear that we all agree that we should have some sort of voter ID component when it comes to voting. It's just a question of coming to agreement on what that should be.
To accommodate for the potential for human error, I think the strength in our system is really in the numbers of people who are responsible for helping us conduct our elections. That's our 247 town and city clerks, all of their boards of civil authority, their election poll workers who come out to help them, and of course the elections team at the Secretary of State's office as well. People and processes are important, but you are part of the people, and that means if you see something, you need to say something, either to your local clerk or to my office or to the Attorney General's office or the FBI, depending on your perception of the level of severity of what you saw. But please do include my office because we want to keep track of instances of irregularities so that we can be thinking of ways to make the system more foolproof. Thanks for coming out.
Ron?
Well, first of all, thanks to the Burlington GOP for putting this together. This has really been a very good forum. As far as my own work, again, I just want to emphasize we don't have proof of fraud, but we do have patterns that deserve some sort of review. We have a system where once the ballot is accepted, it can't be separated out. And so the entire system depends on the voter checklist. If there are problems with the checklist, that matters. And these concerns deserve to be investigated, but the solution is straightforward. Put control of the voter checklist back into the hands of the towns.
They have control.
And towns can share with the state, but not the other way around. These are things that we should be addressed. We should be able to address constructively. And the confidence in our election system really comes from verification. It doesn't come from a presumption that this is the way things ought to work.
John?
Well, first of all, yeah, thanks to everybody up here. Thanks to folks who put it on, everybody who came out. This is great. I love this stuff. I'm a total election geek, if you haven't figured that out already. I would say, this is just reminding me that I love the system. I love questioning the system. I think you put those together, and there's no better definition of democracy. And yeah, so thanks for having me.
Yep, so thank you, everyone. We'll be around for some questions. Just in closing, I hope we continue this conversation. I'll tell you, I'm distraught by people's concerns and overtly discussing fraud and not having a conversation to resolve these issues. I've worked all over the world. I still think this is the greatest country in the world, and I think we need to have more faith in our elections, and we can't do that if we're poking each other and having private conversations behind the wall. So welcome, thank you for coming out, and have a great one.
Nice job.
Thank you.